He was a king, and the city was his court. Damien Blackwood, a titan of industry, stood under the grand chandeliers of the Metropolitan Legacy Gala. A smug grin plastered on his face. On his arm was not his wife, but his mistress, a starlet draped in diamonds, a symbol of his power. He thought his pregnant wife Isabella was at home, a forgotten chapter in his ascent. He believed he had all the power, held all the cards. But in a world of secrets and lies, the most dangerous person isn't the one who shouts, but the one who waits. Tonight, the stage was set for his greatest triumph, but he failed to read the program. A surprise guest was about to be announced, and his entire world was about to burn to the ground. The air in the grand ballroom of Cipriani Wall Street was thick with the scent of money, power, and expensive perfume. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, dripped light onto a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. This was the Metropolitan Legacy Gala, the undisputed pinnacle of New York's philanthropic calendar, where billionaires wrote seven-figure checks between sips of vintage Dom Perignon and whispered about the rise and fall of empires. And tonight, there was no empire more celebrated than that of Damien Blackwood. At 38, Damien was the man of the hour, the year, the decade. His firm, Blackwood Capital, had just orchestrated a hostile takeover so audacious, so brilliant, that the Wall Street Journal had compared him to a modern-day Rockefeller. He was handsome in a cruel, sharp way, with eyes the color of cold steel, and a smile that could disarm a boardroom or break a heart with equal ease. He moved through the crowd like a shark, a predator in his element. And on his arm, clinging to him with a possessive gleam in her eye, was Seraphina Dubois. She was an actress whose fame was eclipsed only by her ambition. Dressed in a scandalously crimson gown that left little to the imagination, she wore a cascade of Cartier diamonds around her neck, a gift from Damien, a very public statement. "Darling Robert Sterling is staring," Seraphina murmured, her voice a sultry purr. "He looks positively green. I think he wanted that Ethelred acquisition for himself." Damien's smile widened. He squeezed her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles. Let him stare. The old guard needs to learn what the future looks like. It looks like us. The us was a dagger, and everyone there knew it. Damien Blackwood was a married man. His wife Isabella Rossi was a name whispered with a mixture of pity and curiosity. She was the quiet architect he had married 5 years ago, before his meteoric rise. She was beautiful, intelligent, and from a respectable, if not stratospherically wealthy family of Italian artisans. She was also, as society pages had recently confirmed, 7 months pregnant with their first child, and she was nowhere to be seen. "A shame Isabella couldn't make it," commented an elderly woman, Beatrice Vanderbilt, a doyenne of old money, whose disapproval was a social death sentence. "The final trimester can be so draining." Damien feigned a look of concerned regret. "She sends her deepest apologies, Beatrice. The doctor insisted she rest. Her health and the baby's is my top priority." The lie slid off his tongue as smoothly as the aged scotch in his glass. Isabella wasn't resting. He hadn't spoken to her in 2 days, not since their last sterile conversation about nursery furniture. He knew she was at home in their sterile white-on-white penthouse overlooking Central Park, a gilded cage he had built for her, and then promptly abandoned. He saw the looks, the exchanged glances between society wives and their powerful husbands. They saw Seraphina brazen and triumphant, and they saw Isabella's conspicuous absence. In their world, affairs were common, but flaunting them so openly at an event of this magnitude was a breach of protocol. It was a declaration of intent. He was casting off the old and embracing the new. His COO, Marcus Thorne, a man whose loyalty Damien had always taken for granted, approached him with a tight expression. "Damien, a word." "Can it wait?" "Marcus." Serafina was just about to tell me about her new film deal. Marcus's gaze flickered to Serafina, a flicker of something unreadable, distaste perhaps, before settling back on Damien. "It's about the keynote speaker. There's been a last-minute change to the program." Damien waved a dismissive hand. "Don't bother me with logistics. As long as the check I wrote clears, they can have a dancing bear give the speech for all I care." He turned his back on Marcus, pulling Serafina closer. He wanted everyone to see them. He wanted the world to understand that he took what he wanted. And right now he wanted this fiery, ambitious creature, not the quiet, gentle woman who carried his child. He felt an intoxicating rush of power, a sense of absolute invincibility. He had conquered Wall Street. He had the most talked-about woman in the city on his arm. He was untouchable. Across the room, journalists scribbled in their notepads. Penelope Croft, a notorious columnist for New York society, watched Damien and Serafina with a predatory focus. Her headline was already writing itself Blackwood debuts newest asset as pregnant wife stays home. It would be the talk of the town for weeks. The lights in the ballroom began to dim, signaling the start of the evening's official program. The host, a famous news anchor, took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your incredible generosity tonight." The anchor began, his voice booming through the sound system. "We have raised a record-breaking sum for the Children's Literacy Foundation." A polite, self-congratulatory applause filled the room. Damien clapped along, one arm wrapped possessively around Serafina's waist. He leaned in and whispered, "My donation was the largest. They're about to name a new library wing after me." Serafina looked up at him with adoring eyes. "My brilliant, generous man." On stage, the anchor continued. "And now, we have a very special presentation. Originally, we were to be addressed by the mayor, but he was unfortunately called away. However, we have a surprise keynote speaker who has graciously stepped in. A person who embodies the spirit of building a better future, not just with steel and glass, but with resilience, integrity, and a quiet strength that will undoubtedly inspire us all." Damien barely listened, more interested in the way the light caught the diamonds on Serafina's neck. He was bored. He was ready for the adulation, the back-patting, the envy. "Please join me." The anchor's voice boomed, pulling him from his reverie, in giving a warm welcome to the renowned architect and the visionary behind the new Children's Wing project, Mrs. Isabella Rossi Blackwood. A spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the side of the stage. And for the first time that night, Damien Blackwood's smug smile faltered. The name echoed in the vast hall, seeming to bounce off every crystal and every stunned, silent face. He blinked, certain he had misheard. It had to be a mistake. But then she emerged from the wings. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a cold, clammy dread. It was Isabella, his wife, and she was walking directly toward the podium. Isabella moved into the spotlight with a grace that defied her 7-month pregnancy. She wasn't supposed to be here. She was supposed to be a ghost, a footnote, a problem to be managed later. But here she was in the flesh, a vision of impossible serenity. She wore a simple, elegant gown of deep emerald silk that draped beautifully over her swollen belly. Her dark hair was swept back, revealing a pair of antique sapphire earrings, her grandmother's the only jewelry she wore. Her face, which Damien had last seen pale with unspoken sorrow, was now composed, her expression calm and unreadable. She looked, to his utter disbelief, magnificent. A collective silent gasp rippled through the ballroom. Every eye swiveled from Isabella on the stage to Damien and the scarlet-clad woman frozen by his side. The air crackled with a sudden, delicious tension. This was no longer a charity gala. It was a coliseum, and the lions had just been released. Serafina's manicured fingers tightened on Damien's arm, like a vice. "What is she doing here?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "Damien, do something." But Damien couldn't move. He was paralyzed, his mind struggling to process the scene. His meticulously crafted world, with its neat compartments for wife and mistress business and pleasure, was collapsing in on itself. This was not part of the plan. Isabella didn't do things like this. She was quiet, reserved, conflict-averse. She was the one who smoothed things over, who managed the household staff with quiet efficiency, who endured his moods and his absences without a word of complaint. The woman on that stage was a stranger to him. Isabella reached the podium and adjusted the microphone, the sound echoing in the tomb-like silence. She scanned the crowd, her gaze sweeping over the faces of the city's elite. For a fleeting moment, her eyes met Damien's. There was no hatred in them, no anger, no tears. There was something far more, terrifying resolve. Then her gaze slid past him to Serafina, holding for a fraction of a second longer. A look of cool clinical assessment, as if observing a particularly uninteresting insect. In that single glance, she dismissed her. Serafina visibly flinched, her mask of sultry confidence cracking. To understand the depth of Damien's shock, one had to understand the lie of their marriage. He had courted Isabella for her class and her quiet stability. The Rossis were respected, a family of master craftsmen and architects who valued legacy over flashy wealth. Marrying Isabella had been a strategic move, lending his ruthless, new money ambition a veneer of old-world respectability. He had mistaken her gentleness for weakness. He had mistaken her silence for submission. The affair with Serafina had begun 6 months prior. It was a cliché, a torrid, exhilarating escape from the quiet predictability of his life. Serafina was everything Isabella was not: loud, demanding, and insatiably ambitious. She fed his ego, celebrated his ruthlessness, and made him feel like the king he believed himself to be. The moment he learned of Isabella's pregnancy, a cold calculation had settled in his heart. The timing was inconvenient. A baby, a family, it was a tether. He had started to lay the groundwork for an exit, subtly moving assets consulting with divorce lawyers who specialized in protecting the wealthier party. He had assumed Isabella, heartbroken and heavy with child, would be easy to manage. He would give her a generous settlement. She would retreat from public life with their child, and he would be free to build his new life with Serafina. He had underestimated her on every conceivable level. The memory of how she'd likely discovered the full extent of his betrayal flashed in his mind. 2 weeks ago, he'd been careless. A credit card statement left on his home office desk, not for his personal card, but for a corporate account he used for discretionary expenses. It listed a $250,000 charge from Cartier. He had told Isabella the company had purchased corporate gifts, but the detailed receipt which he had foolishly tucked inside the statement told a different story. It detailed the Serafina necklace, a custom piece. He remembered coming home that evening to find the statement exactly where he'd left it. Isabella had said nothing. She had been quiet, withdrawn, and he had attributed it to pregnancy hormones, feeling a flicker of annoyance rather than guilt. He hadn't realized he wasn't witnessing a woman breaking down. He was witnessing a woman taking notes. Now standing on that stage, she was not the woman he had left in that penthouse. She was a general surveying the battlefield before the first volley. She leaned into the microphone, her voice clear and steady, devoid of any tremor. "Good evening," she began. "My name is Isabella Rossi. Some of you know me as Damien Blackwood's wife, others as an architect. Tonight, I am here to speak about legacies, the ones we build, the ones we inherit, and the ones we must sometimes tear down to make way for something better." Damien's heart hammered against his ribs. Rossi. She had used her maiden name first. It was a small detail, but it was a declaration of war. He felt 100 pairs of eyes on him dissecting his reaction. He tried to compose his features into a mask of placid confusion, of a husband surprised but proud of his wife's impromptu appearance. But the sweat beading on his brow betrayed him. Marcus Thorne, his COO, was standing near the edge of the room, his face grim. He wasn't looking at the stage. He was looking directly at Damien. And in that moment, a sickening realization dawned. Marcus knew. He had known this was going to happen. The betrayal was deeper and more complex than he could ever have imagined. This wasn't a spontaneous, emotional outburst from a scorned wife. This was a coup, and it had been planned with military precision. Isabella's voice flowed over the silent audience, a calm river that belied the torrent of devastation it was about to unleash. "We are here tonight to support the Children's Literacy Foundation," she said, her tone even and warm. "A cause dedicated to providing children with the tools to build their own futures, to write their own stories. A story is a powerful thing. It can be a shelter, a map, or a weapon. It all depends on who is telling it, and why." Damien watched, mesmerized and horrified. This was a performance, and she was in complete control. The audience was leaning in, captivated by this pregnant, serene woman who had appeared like an apparition. They had expected a tearful, humiliated wife. They were getting something else entirely. "For the past 5 years," Isabella continued, her gaze sweeping the room, but never landing on him, "I have been part of a story. The story of Blackwood Capital, a tale of ambition, innovation, and unprecedented success. I have watched from the sidelines as my husband, Damien Blackwood, built an empire." A smattering of polite applause broke out. Damien forced a tight, pained smile. She was praising him. What was this? Was she trying to win him back with a public display of loyalty? The thought was so absurd, it was almost laughable. "I put my own career, my own name, Rossi, on hold to support that vision," she went on, her voice gaining a new, harder edge. "I believed in the story we were writing together, a partnership, a legacy for the child we are expecting." She paused, placing a hand gently on her stomach. The gesture was both maternal and fiercely protective. It was a reminder to everyone in the room of what was at stake and the depth of the betrayal they were all witnessing. But stories like buildings can have faulty foundations. They can be built on half-truths and secrets that over time cause cracks in the facade. And if those cracks are not addressed, the entire structure will inevitably collapse. The temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. The subtext was now text. This was no longer a keynote speech. It was a public indictment. Serafina was practically vibrating with fury beside him. "Make her stop," she hissed through clenched teeth. "This is a disaster. Your reputation—" "Shut up!" Damien snapped, his eyes glued to the stage. His mind was racing, trying to find an angle, a way to spin this. He could claim she was unwell, distraught, due to her pregnancy, not in her right mind. He could have security escort her off the stage, but he knew it was too late. The damage was already done. The bomb had been armed, and she was about to detonate it. "I discovered recently," Isabella said, her voice dropping to a more intimate conspiratorial level, drawing the audience in even further, "that the story of Blackwood Capital was not entirely as it seemed. Its success was built not only on brilliant strategy, but on a culture of moral compromise, on deals made in shadows, on promises broken, on a foundation not of granite, but of sand." Murmurs erupted around the room. This was about more than infidelity now. She was attacking the company. She was attacking him. And so, Isabella declared, her voice ringing with newfound authority, "I was left with a choice. Do I allow the legacy my child is set to inherit to be one built on deceit? Do I stand by silently while the name Blackwood becomes synonymous, not with success but with scandal?" She paused, letting the rhetorical question hang in the air. "I chose to act. I chose to build something new." Damien felt a cold dread unlike anything he had ever known. It was the feeling of a king realizing his throne was made of cardboard. What did she mean, she chose to act? What could she possibly do? She was an architect. She had no power, no influence in his world. The anchor who had introduced her stepped forward slightly, a confused look on his face, as if wondering whether to intervene. But Isabella held up a hand, a gesture of command that stopped him in his tracks. "You see, there is a part of the Blackwood Capital story that has never been made public," she announced. "When Damien started his firm 10 years ago, he did so with the help of a silent partner, a primary investor who believed in his potential but wished to remain anonymous. This investor provided the seed capital, a 70% stake that launched the company." The ballroom was utterly silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble floor. Damien's world tilted on its axis. The seed capital that had come from an anonymous trust. He'd never questioned it, assuming it was from some eccentric old-money billionaire who enjoyed backing long shots. He'd never been able to uncover the source. That investment was made not just in a company, but in a man who was about to marry into my family. Isabella revealed, her voice clear as a bell. "The silent partner, the majority shareholder of Blackwood Capital, was never a mystery to me. It was my father, Giovanni Rossi." The name landed like a cannonball. Giovanni Rossi. The quiet, unassuming master artisan. Damien's mind reeled. He remembered his father-in-law as a man who worked with his hands, who spoke of wood grain and structural integrity, who seemed utterly unimpressed by Damien's talk of derivatives and market caps. He had dismissed him as a simple provincial man. And all this time, that simple man had owned him, per the terms of the investment contract. Isabella continued, her eyes finally locking onto Damien's, with the chilling finality of a judge passing sentence. "The Rossi family retained the right to call a vote of no confidence in the CEO and transfer its controlling shares to a designated heir in the event of gross moral or ethical turpitude that threatened the family's name and investment. Flaunting an affair while your pregnant wife is at home, I believe that qualifies." She took a step forward away from the podium, her presence filling the stage. As of 6 p.m. this evening, an emergency meeting of the board was convened. My father invoked his right. He transferred his entire 70% stake to me. The board, including COO Marcus Thorne. She nodded toward Marcus, who met her gaze with a solemn nod of his own. "Has voted. Damien Blackwood has been removed as CEO of Blackwood Capital, effective immediately." A tidal wave of gasps and shocked exclamations washed over the room. Damien went completely deathly pale. His legs felt weak, his breath caught in his throat. This wasn't happening. It was a nightmare. He looked at Serafina, but her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. The man she had attached herself to, the source of her diamonds and her future, had just been publicly castrated. Isabella wasn't finished. She raised her voice to be heard over the rising din. "My name is Isabella Rossi," she declared, her voice resonating with power and purpose. "And as the new majority shareholder and chairwoman of the board, I want to assure our investors and partners that the company is entering a new era, an era of transparency, integrity, and sustainable growth. We will no longer build on sand. We will build on stone. A new legacy begins tonight." The moment the words, effective immediately, left Isabella's lips, the carefully constructed civility of the gala shattered. The room, which seconds before had been a sea of stunned silence, erupted into a chaotic symphony of noise. The low murmur of whispers exploded into frantic conversation. Cell phones, previously hidden away, emerged in 100 hands, their screens glowing as investors, rivals, and gossips scrambled to text, call, and tweet the news that was breaking like a financial earthquake. Damien Blackwood was out. Deposed. Publicly, spectacularly annihilated. He just stood there, rooted to the spot, the world around him blurring into a cacophony of sound and motion. The champagne glass in his hand slipped from his nerveless fingers and shattered on the floor, the sound lost in the growing uproar. Serafina next to him let out a small, strangled gasp. Her carefully constructed fantasy of a future as Mrs. Blackwood 2.0 dissolving before her eyes. The Cartier diamonds around her neck suddenly felt like a lead weight. On stage, Isabella remained a pillar of calm in the storm she had created. She gave a slight, dignified nod to the audience, ignoring the chaos, and turned to walk off stage. She was immediately flanked by two large men in dark suits, whom Damien had never seen before. Her own security. They escorted her toward a side exit, creating a protective bubble around her, shielding her from the frenzy. The spell of paralysis broke. A primal rage, hot and blinding, surged through Damien. He lunged forward, shoving a startled investment banker out of his way. "Isabella!" He roared, his voice raw with fury and disbelief. He had to get to her. He had to confront her, to undo this. This was his company, his life, his name. She couldn't just take it. But her security team was efficient. They formed a wall between him and the exit, their expressions impassive. Marcus Thorne appeared at their side, his face set like stone. "Don't, Damien," Marcus said, his voice low and firm. "It's over. Over." Damien spat his face, contorted with rage. "You backstabbing traitor! You were in on this. You helped her." "I did what was right for the company," Marcus replied coolly, not flinching from Damien's fury. "You were a liability. Your arrogance, your recklessness. It was going to destroy everything eventually. Isabella is saving it. Saving it. She's an architect. What does she know about running a multi-billion-dollar firm? You'd be surprised what a person can learn when they're underestimated their entire life," Marcus said, before turning his back and following Isabella out the door. The door clicked shut behind them, a sound of absolute finality. Damien was left standing there, abandoned and exposed. The sharks were circling. Robert Sterling, the rival he had gloated about earlier, was now watching him with a look of pure, unadulterated schadenfreude. Penelope Croft, the journalist, was furiously typing on her phone, her eyes alight with the thrill of the scoop of a lifetime. This was better than a mere infidelity scandal. This was a corporate coup d'etat, a dynastic drama playing out in real time. He felt a tug on his sleeve. It was Serafina. Her face was a mess of confusion and panic. "Damien, what does this mean?" she asked, her voice shrill. "What's going to happen? The press is everywhere." "What does it mean?" Damien laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "It means the party's over." He looked at her, at the crimson dress, the borrowed diamonds, the desperate ambition in her eyes. She wasn't a partner. She was a perk of the job he no longer had. An accessory. And right now she was an anchor pulling him down faster. "Get away from me," he snarled, shrugging off her hand as if it were contaminated. Her face fell, shock turning to indignation. "What? After everything, you were a diversion, a trinket. Look around you, it's all gone." He gestured wildly at the room, at the people staring and whispering. His empire had crumbled in less than 10 minutes, and she was worried about the press. His words hit her like a slap. The calculated adoration in her eyes hardened into pure contempt. Without another word, she turned on her heel and disappeared into the crowd, already calculating her next move, distancing herself from the wreckage of his life. Left utterly alone in the center of the storm, Damien's rage began to curdle into a chilling fear. The full implications of what had just happened began to sink in. Giovanni Rossi, his quiet, unassuming father-in-law, a man he'd patronized, gifting him expensive watches he never wore and first-class tickets he often refused. He remembered a conversation years ago in Rossi's workshop, surrounded by the smell of sawdust and varnish. "A man's legacy, Damien," Giovanni had said, running a hand over a piece of century-old oak, "is not what he acquires. It's what he builds, and it must be built on a foundation of honor. Without that, it is nothing but a house of cards." Damien had smiled condescendingly, thinking the old man hopelessly naive. Now the words echoed in his mind as a prophecy fulfilled. He had built a house of cards, and his wife Giovanni's daughter had just blown it down with a single breath. His phone buzzed. It was his bank's private wealth manager. He ignored it. It buzzed again. His corporate counsel. Then a dozen more notifications. A flood of messages from board members, investors, and so-called friends, all demanding answers, all distancing themselves. The empire wasn't just gone. It had been methodically, surgically, and masterfully taken from him by the one person in the world he had never, not for a single second, considered a threat. He had been so focused on the rivals in front of him that he never saw the architect designing his ruin from right inside his own home. The days that followed the gala were a blur of humiliation for Damien. The story was everywhere. It wasn't just on the society pages. It was the lead story on Bloomberg, Forbes, and the Financial Times. The Blackwood coup, they called it. The architect's revenge. How Wall Street's Icarus was grounded by his unseen partner. Isabella Rossi became an overnight sensation, a feminist icon, a business wunderkind. Photos of her serene and pregnant on the gala stage were juxtaposed with photos of Damien pale and shell-shocked, and Serafina fleeing the event in disgrace. His life as he knew it was systematically dismantled. His corporate credit cards were declined. His access to the Blackwood Capitol building was revoked. When he tried to return to the penthouse to retrieve his things, he was met at the door by one of Isabella's new security guards and informed that his presence was not welcome. His personal belongings had been packed and sent to a storage unit. He tried to fight back. He called his lawyers, screaming at them to find a loophole to sue Isabella her father the board. Their response was calm and devastating. The contract was ironclad. The moral turpitude clause was airtight, and Damien's public flaunting of his affair provided more than enough evidence. Marcus Thorne had meticulously documented every expense, every trip, every lie, and presented it to the board. The vote had been unanimous. He had no legal recourse. He was locked out of his own life, forced to watch from the sidelines as Isabella took control with an efficiency that was staggering. What Damien couldn't see were the months of quiet, painstaking planning that had preceded the gala. The story had not begun with the Cartier receipt. It had begun almost a year earlier with a subtle shift in Damien's behavior. The late nights he claimed were meetings, the scent of a different perfume on his suits, the emotional distance that had grown into a chasm. Isabella was an architect. Her mind was trained to see the structure beneath the surface, to understand that small hairline cracks could signal deep foundational flaws. She didn't confront him. She observed. She gathered data. Using her own savings, she hired a private investigator, a discreet professional who confirmed her suspicions with a portfolio of heartbreaking evidence photos of Damien and Serafina in Paris, London, and at a private villa in Lake Como. The pain of the betrayal was immense, a physical ache in her chest. For weeks she grieved for the man she thought she had married, and the future she thought they would build. She cried in the silent, empty rooms of their penthouse, one hand on her growing belly, feeling utterly alone. But Isabella Rossi was her father's daughter. She was descended from a long line of builders, not victims. And as the initial shock subsided, her grief began to harden into something else resolve. She called her father. She didn't cry or scream. She laid out the facts calmly, logically, as if presenting a design proposal. Giovanni Rossi listened in silence from his workshop in Tuscany, where he'd been overseeing a restoration project. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "The foundation is rotten," he finally said, his voice heavy. "You cannot build a family on a rotten foundation. What do you want to do, mia cara?" "I don't want a divorce settlement," Isabella said, her voice firm. "I don't want his money. I want to protect the legacy, our legacy, the one you invested in." That was when Giovanni reminded her of the clause, the one his lawyers had insisted upon a decade ago, a clause to protect the family name should the ambitious young man he was backing ever forget where he came from. The plan began to take shape. Isabella flew to Tuscany. In her father's quiet study, overlooking the rolling hills, they mapped out their strategy. Giovanni made one call to Marcus Thorne. Marcus had been with Blackwood Capital from the beginning. He was a decent man who had grown increasingly disgusted by Damien's hubris and cruelty. He admired Isabella's intelligence and grace and felt a deep sense of loyalty to the company's true foundation. When Giovanni Rossi called him and laid out the situation, Marcus didn't hesitate. His allegiance shifted. For the next 3 months, Isabella worked in secret. She was no stranger to complex projects. She had overseen the design and construction of skyscrapers. A corporate takeover, she discovered, was not so different. It required precision, a deep understanding of the structure, and the right team. While Damien was distracted by his affair and his latest conquest on Wall Street, Isabella was studying. Guided by Marcus and a team of corporate lawyers her father hired, she devoured every document related to the company financials, investment portfolios, personnel files. She learned the business from the inside out, not from a CEO's 30,000-foot view, but from the ground up. She discovered Damien's reckless gambles, the toxic work environment he fostered, and the simmering resentment among his employees. She chose the Metropolitan Legacy Gala as her stage. It was Damien's coronation the night he would be celebrating his own greatness. The irony was too perfect to resist. She used her role as the architect for the Foundation's new wing to secure the surprise keynote speaker slot, telling the organizers only that she was representing a major anonymous donor who wished to make a official announcement. The day of the gala, she was a whirlwind of calm, focused activity. She signed the share transfer documents with her father. She held a video conference with the board minus Damien, where Marcus presented the case against him. The vote was swift and decisive. She selected her security team. She wrote her speech, every word carefully chosen for maximum impact. When she walked into that ballroom, she was not a woman scorned. She was a CEO taking possession of her company. Her pregnancy was not a vulnerability. It was her armor, a symbol of the future she was fighting to protect. She didn't do it for revenge. Revenge was too small, too petty. She did it for the integrity of the name Rossi, for the employees of the company who deserved better, and for the child who would one day ask her about their father. She wanted to be able to provide an answer that wasn't about weakness, but about strength. She wanted to tell them a story, not of a broken home, but of a legacy reclaimed. In the weeks that followed, Damien Blackwood learned the true meaning of the word alone. The phone calls stopped. The invitations dried up. Former colleagues crossed the street to avoid him. He was a pariah, a walking cautionary tale whispered about at exclusive country clubs and over expensive lunches he could no longer afford. His financial situation was dire. His assets were almost entirely tied up in Blackwood Capital stock options, which were now worthless to him. The lawyers he had on retainer for his divorce were now billing him exorbitant amounts to tell him he had no case. He was forced to move out of his hotel suite and into a small, generic rented apartment, a place that felt like a prison after the sprawling penthouse. He tried to find work, but his name was toxic. No one on Wall Street would touch him. His spectacular public downfall had made him a liability. His reputation for brilliance was now overshadowed by his reputation for arrogance and catastrophic misjudgment. He had flown too close to the sun, and everyone had watched him burn. One evening, deep in a haze of self-pity and expensive whiskey, his doorbell rang. It was Serafina. She looked different without the designer clothes and professional makeup. Smaller, harder. "I need to talk to you," she said, pushing past him into the apartment. "What do you want?" he slurred. "The press won't leave me alone," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "My agent dropped me. A film I was up for a career-making role, they gave it to someone else. They said I bring too much baggage. My life is ruined because of you." Damien laughed, a bitter, ugly sound. "Your life? You think this is about you? I lost everything. You deserve to lose everything." She shot back, her voice rising. "You lied to me, Damien. You told me you were leaving her. You made me believe we had a future. I was a fool. I attached myself to a sinking ship. So you came here to tell me that to kick me while I'm down." "No," she said, her expression turning cold. "I came here for payment, for my silence. I know about the Ethelred deal. I know you paid off a regulator to get it approved. I was there when you took the call." Damien stared at her. The alcoholic fog in his brain momentarily clearing, replaced by a wave of ice-cold panic. The Ethelred deal was his masterpiece, but it had a dark secret. He had bribed an SEC official to look the other way on an antitrust concern. It was the one skeleton in his closet that could lead to actual prison time. "You wouldn't," he breathed. "Try me," Serafina said, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "I need to salvage my career and my reputation. A tell-all book, an exclusive interview. A story about the brave young actress who was manipulated by a corrupt Wall Street monster. It has a certain ring to it. Unless, of course, I have a reason to forget what I know. A very, very good reason." He saw it then, the raw, transactional nature of their entire relationship. He had been her mark, and now she was cashing out. He was no longer a king, just a disgraced man with one last secret to sell. Meanwhile, Isabella was thriving. The initial market shock over the CEO change quickly subsided, replaced by a growing sense of confidence. Isabella proved to be a natural leader. She was decisive, intelligent, and unlike Damien, she listened. Her first act as chairwoman was to hold a company-wide town hall. She didn't hide in a corner office. She stood before the hundreds of employees, spoke with transparency about the challenges ahead, and laid out a new vision for the company, one based on ethical practices and long-term value, not short-term gambles. She promoted talented women who had been overlooked by Damien. She implemented a more generous parental leave policy. She rebranded the firm, changing the name from Blackwood Capital to Rossi Thorn Legacy, elevating Marcus to CEO while she remained chairwoman. The press, which had been so captivated by the drama, was now captivated by her competence. She gave one exclusive interview to a respected female journalist from Forbes. She didn't sling mud. She spoke about her architectural background, applying principles of design, strong foundations, functional elegance, building for longevity to business. She spoke of the legacy she wanted to build for her child. She was poised, brilliant, and in control. The market responded. Investors who had been wary were now impressed. The stock, after an initial dip, began to climb, steadier and more robust than ever. She was proving that integrity wasn't just good morals, it was good business. One afternoon, sitting in her new office, a space she had redesigned herself with warm woods, clean lines, and an abundance of natural light, she received a call. It was from a divorce lawyer. Not hers, but Damien's. He was finally ready to settle. His demands were gone. He would sign whatever she put in front of him. She hung up the phone and looked out the window at the New York skyline, a panorama of steel and glass ambition. For a long time, she had felt like a small, insignificant part of that landscape, a shadow to her husband's towering presence. Now she was one of its architects. She had not just torn down Damien's house of cards. She had built a fortress in its place. 6 months after the gala, in the sterile, quiet hush of a private suite at Lenox Hill Hospital, Isabella Rossi held her new world in her arms. She had given birth to a son, a healthy 7-pound miracle with a full head of dark hair and eyes that, when they opened, were a startlingly familiar shade of steel grey. She named him Giovanni, a tribute to the man whose quiet strength had been the bedrock of her own. As she rocked the baby, the city lights twinkling far below, she felt a profound sense of peace settle over her, a calm that was not the absence of a storm, but the solid ground on the other side of it. The fight hadn't just been for a company. It had been for this tiny, perfect life, for the story she would one day be proud to tell him. Life found a new, demanding yet deeply fulfilling rhythm. The roles of mother and chairwoman were not mutually exclusive. Isabella discovered they informed one another. In the boardroom, she approached decisions with a new perspective, a fierce maternal instinct to protect and nurture the company for the long term. She was not the ruthless corporate raider Damien had been. She was an architect. She thought in terms of decades, not quarters. She invested in her people, implementing industry-leading parental leave policies, mentorship programs, and a transparent culture that fostered loyalty Damien had only ever tried to buy. Rossi Thorne Legacy, the firm she had renamed to honor her partner Marcus Thorne, and her own heritage began to flourish, not with the explosive volatile growth of Damien's era, but with a steady, formidable strength. They became a beacon on Wall Street for a different kind of success, one built on integrity. Damien, meanwhile, was learning the architecture of ruin. His world had shrunk to the 4 beige walls of a generic, soulless apartment in a part of the city he once flew over in his helicopter. The days were long and empty, punctuated by the sting of fresh humiliations. Old contacts, men who had once courted his favor, now sent his calls to voicemail. The invitations to golf at Shinnecock or to join private equity roundtables were a distant memory. He was a ghost haunting the edges of a world that had once been his kingdom. He spent hours watching financial news channels, a form of self-torture. He saw Isabella. She was a guest on Bloomberg, poised and articulate, discussing market trends with a confident ease that infuriated and fascinated him. She wasn't the quiet, deferential woman he had married. She was a force. He read the Forbes article, the one that dubbed her the architect of Wall Street, a dozen times. He studied the accompanying photo of her in her new office, a space filled with light and clean lines, a stark contrast to the dark, intimidating mahogany den he had favored. She was smiling a genuine smile he hadn't seen in years, and her hand rested protectively on her pregnant belly. Every image, every word of praise for her was another shovelful of dirt on the grave of his former life. His affair with Serafina felt like a cheap, tawdry footnote to his own destruction. She had bled him dry for her silence about the Ethelred deal, and then vanished, leaving him with just enough money to be miserable. One crisp autumn afternoon, Isabella decided to take Giovanni for a walk. The air was cool, and the leaves in Central Park were a riot of gold and crimson. As she pushed the stroller along a familiar path near the reservoir, her son sleeping soundly under a soft blanket, she saw a figure on a bench hunched over, staring at the ground. Damien. He was a spectre of the man he once was. The custom-tailored suit was replaced by a frayed jacket and worn-out jeans. He was thinner, and his once immaculate hair was unkempt. He looked lost, hollowed out by his own choices. Her first instinct was a visceral one, to turn to steer the stroller down another path and protect her son from the sorrow and failure that clung to the man on the bench. It would be easy. He hadn't even seen them. But she stopped. That was the old Isabella, the one who avoided conflict, who retreated. She was a different woman now. She was a Rossi. She was Giovanni's mother. And this broken man was her son's father. Straightening her shoulders, she pushed the stroller forward, the wheels making a soft crunching sound on the gravel path. The sound made him look up. His eyes, those same steely eyes that now looked back at her, from her son's face, widened first in shock, then in a wave of profound gut-wrenching shame. He seemed to shrink into himself, unable to meet her gaze, his eyes falling instead on the bassinet. Isabella. He breathed, his voice a hoarse whisper. He slowly, hesitantly, got to his feet. "Hello, Damien?" she said, her voice even and calm. She stopped a few feet away, a safe distance. He took a tentative step closer, his gaze fixed on the sleeping baby. Is that him?" "Yes," she said, a simple statement of fact. "This is Giovanni." A storm of emotions crossed Damien's face, all regret, a deep, aching sorrow for a life he had never known he wanted until it was irrevocably gone. "He's beautiful," he murmured, his voice cracking. "Isabella, he looks perfect." "He is," she affirmed, her hand resting on the stroller's handle. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken words, with years of mistakes and months of consequences. The cheerful sounds of the park children, laughing, a distant dog barking, seemed to belong to another universe. "I saw the article. The one in Forbes," Damien said, finally desperate to fill the void. "And the quarterly reports. They're public record." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "What you've done with the company, it's masterful. You stabilized the European fund, something I always struggled with. You built a real culture. It's better, stronger than it ever was with me." It was an admission that cost his shattered ego dearly, but it was the truth. A building needs a solid foundation. "Damien," she replied, her tone more like a professor than an ex-wife. "You were focused on building higher, faster. You never cared what was underneath. I had to build something that would last. For him." She glanced down at her sleeping son. His shoulders slumped in defeat. "I know I have no right." He began, his voice raw, with a desperation that was utterly foreign to the man he used to be. He finally met her eyes, and she saw the full depth of his desolation. "I know I deserve none of your kindness, but I have to ask, Isabella, will I ever be able to see him, to know him?" Isabella looked from the broken man before her to the innocent child in the stroller. The pain he'd inflicted was a scar on her heart, a permanent part of her history. But her son's future was a clean page. Did he deserve to grow up with a father-shaped hole in his life? Or did he deserve to know the truth, however complicated revenge was an ending? This, she realized, had to be a beginning. "Perhaps," she said, her voice softening just a fraction. It was not forgiveness, not yet. It was a challenge. "But not like this. Not as a ghost. Go and build something, Damien. Not an empire, something small, something real. Get a job. Pay your own rent. Show that you can create something, however modest, with honesty and your own 2 hands. Show that you can respect yourself. When you can look in the mirror and not hate the man you see, when you have a life you are proud to show your son, then you can call me. Then we can talk about a beginning." It was more than he could have hoped for. A single tear escaped his eye and traced a path through the grime on his cheek. He nodded, unable to speak the sliver of hope she offered, both a lifeline and a monumental task. "Thank you," he whispered. Isabella held his gaze for a moment longer, a silent acknowledgement of the final closing of one chapter and the tentative opening of another. Then she turned, her posture erect and her stride confident. She pushed the stroller deeper into the park, moving away from the shadows of the past and into the warm golden light of the autumn afternoon. She did not look back. She was Isabella Rossi, the architect of her own life, and the most magnificent structure she would ever create was the future, a future she was building one strong, steady, and deliberate step at a time. And so the story of Damien Blackwood serves as a chilling reminder. A throne built on lies is made of glass, and underestimating the person you sideline is the most dangerous gamble of all. Isabella Rossi didn't just reclaim her life. She rebuilt an empire on a foundation of integrity and strength, proving that the best revenge isn't fury, but a life lived brilliantly. She tore down a house of cards and in its place constructed a legacy of stone, not for a man who betrayed her, but for the child who represented her future. What did you think of Isabella's masterful move? Do you believe Damien deserved a second chance? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of justice and rebirth resonated with you, show your support by hitting that like button, sharing it with someone who loves a story of epic revenge, and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for more dramatic stories that prove the quietest voices can make the loudest impact. Thank you for listening. The pristine white sheets of the hospital bed were a cruel joke, a stark contrast to the messy, agonizing reality of her life tearing apart. One moment Isabella was pushing through the searing pain of premature labor, her heart screaming for her husband, Alejandro. The next he was there. But he wasn't alone. Standing beside him, radiating a cold, polished glamour, was the one woman Isabella had prayed was just a figment of her paranoid, pregnant imagination. And as her world crumbled, a single devastating question hung in the air, a question that would be answered by a DNA test, a test that would either validate her deepest love or confirm her darkest betrayal, changing everything forever. Isabella's life was by all external measures a modern-day fairy tale. She lived in a sprawling glass-walled mansion nestled in the most exclusive enclave of the city, a home that boasted panoramic views and an infinity pool that bled into the horizon. Her wardrobe was a curated collection of runway couture, her social calendar a whirlwind of philanthropic galas and exclusive art openings. And at the center of it all was Alejandro Morales, her husband. Alejandro was a titan of industry, a self-made millionaire who had built a tech empire from the ground up. He was devastatingly handsome, with eyes the color of dark honey, and a smile that could disarm world leaders and melt Isabella's heart in equal measure. They had met 5 years ago at a charity auction, a chance encounter that felt like kismet. He had pursued her with a single-minded intensity that left her breathless, showering her with affection, respect, and a love so profound it felt like the safest harbor in the world. Their marriage had been passionate, a true partnership. He valued her opinion on everything from business acquisitions to the thread count of their linens. She, in turn, was his confidant, his sanctuary from the cutthroat world he navigated. When she told him she was pregnant 9 months ago, he had wept with joy, lifting her into his arms and spinning her around in their sun-drenched living room, promising their child a life of boundless love and opportunity. For the first 6 months of her pregnancy, that promise held true. Alejandro was attentive doting. He'd rush home from the office for her doctor's appointments, massage her swollen feet for hours, and talk to her growing belly, telling his unborn child stories of the adventures they would have. Isabella had never felt more cherished, more certain of her happiness. But then a subtle shift occurred, a change in the atmosphere as imperceptible as a barometric drop before a storm. It started with the late nights. Closing a big deal, mi amor, he'd murmur, his voice weary over the phone. Then came the weekend trips, sudden and non-negotiable. Investor meetings in Singapore, he'd explain, his kiss a fleeting brush against her cheek as he left. The distance wasn't just physical. The easy intimacy they shared began to fray at the edges. He grew guarded with his phone, angling it away from her, when a text message lit up the screen. The shared laughter that once filled their cavernous home became a rare echo. Isabella, hormonal and increasingly anxious, tried to dismiss her fears. This was the pressure of his work, she told herself. He was building a legacy for their child. To doubt him felt like a betrayal in itself. Yet the gnawing unease persisted. She started noticing a new scent on his suits, a faint floral perfume that was decidedly not hers. She saw a credit card statement with a charge for a lavish dinner at a restaurant they had never been to together. When she gently questioned him, he became defensive, his voice taking on a hard edge she'd never heard before. "Are you questioning my loyalty?" "Isabella." After everything he'd asked, his eyes flashing with a mix of anger and hurt that made her instantly retreat, apologizing for her insecurity. The name Sophia Reyes first entered her consciousness as a whisper on the society pages. A rising starlet, an actress with smoldering eyes and a reputation for being as ambitious as she was beautiful. Alejandro's company had recently signed a major endorsement deal with her. "She's the new face of our brand," he'd explained dismissively when Isabella saw a picture of them together at a press event, his arm firmly around Sophia's waist. They looked for all the world like a couple. Isabella spent the final weeks of her pregnancy in a state of quiet torment, her days a hollow performance of the happy, expectant mother. She decorated the nursery in shades of cream and soft blue. Her hands assembling a crib, she prayed her husband would one day stand beside, with love not duty. She smiled at the baby showers her friends threw, accepting gifts with a gratitude that felt like a lie. Every night she lay in their king-sized bed, the space beside her feeling more like a chasm, and prayed that the birth of their child would be the miracle that would bring her Alejandro back to her. She didn't know that the birth would indeed bring a revelation, but it would be far from the miracle she was hoping for. It would be the beginning of the end. The first pang of pain was sharp and sudden, a fierce clenching deep in her abdomen that stole her breath. Isabella gasped, her hand flying to her belly. It was 2 weeks before her due date. It was too soon. She tried to breathe through it, telling herself it was just another Braxton Hicks contraction, another false alarm. But then another came stronger this time, a relentless wave that brought her to her knees on the cold marble floor of the foyer. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the pain. This was real. This was happening. Her first instinct was to call Alejandro. Her hands trembled as she fumbled for her phone. His name at the top of her recent calls. It rang once, twice, then went straight to voicemail. "The person you are trying to reach is unavailable. Please leave a message. Alejandro." "It's me." She choked out, her voice a ragged whisper between contractions. "The baby. It's coming. I'm going to the hospital. Please, please meet me there. I need you." She tried again. Voicemail. And again. Voicemail. The automated voice was a cold, indifferent sentinel guarding the man who had promised to move mountains for her. Despair warred with the urgency of the moment. With a surge of adrenaline, she called her driver, her voice miraculously steady as she gave him the address. The Clínica Universidad de Navarra in Madrid. The private hospital Alejandro had insisted upon, renowned for its state-of-the-art maternity ward and its discretion for high-profile clients. The drive through the city was a blur of traffic lights and horns, each sound amplifying the frantic rhythm of her heart. The contractions were coming faster now, a merciless tide pulling her under. The hospital staff was waiting alerted by her call. They whisked her into a private birthing suite, a room that looked more like a luxury hotel than a medical facility with soft lighting and sweeping city views. But its opulence only made her feel more alone. Nurses with kind, professional faces hooked her up to monitors their soothing words, a distant buzz against the roar of her fear. Where was he? Hours bled into one another. Each contraction was a mountain she had to climb alone. She clutched the cool metal of the bed rail, her knuckles white, her body screaming for relief, her heart screaming for her husband. The nurses offered sympathetic glances. "Have we managed to reach your husband, Mrs. Morales?" one asked gently. Isabella could only shake her head, the shame and fear a toxic cocktail in her throat. And then, just as she felt she was losing her grip, the door to her suite swung open. For a heart-stopping second, relief flooded her. He was here. Alejandro stood in the doorway, his tailored suit slightly disheveled, his hair looking like he'd run his hands through it 100 times. But the relief curdled into ice-cold shock. He was not alone. Standing just behind him, her hand possessively resting on his arm, was Sofia Reyes. The actress was a vision of cruel perfection. She wore a figure-hugging crimson dress that seemed to mock the sterile white of the hospital. Her makeup was flawless, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders in a perfect wave. She surveyed the room with an air of bored amusement. Her eyes, when they finally landed on Isabella in the bed, held a glint of undisguised triumph. It was the look of a predator who had finally cornered her prey. The beeping of the fetal heart monitor seemed to grow louder, a frantic, rhythmic testament to the chaos that had just stormed into the room. Isabella stared at them, at Sofia's hand on her husband's arm, at the unapologetic way Alejandro stood there, bringing his mistress to the birth of his child. The pain of her contractions was nothing compared to the agony that ripped through her heart. The storm had not just arrived. It had made landfall directly in the center of her soul. The air in the birthing suite grew thick, heavy with unspoken betrayals and the sterile scent of antiseptic. For a long moment, the only sound was the frantic, steady beep of the monitor, tracking her baby's heartbeat, a stark counterpoint to Isabella's own, which felt as if it had shattered into a million silent pieces. Alejandro. Isabella's voice was a fragile thread of sound, barely audible over the hum of the machines. He finally moved, detaching himself from Sofia's grasp, as if suddenly remembering where he was. He took a hesitant step forward, his handsome face a mask of conflicting emotions, guilt, frustration, and a flicker of something she couldn't name. "Isabella, I came as soon as I got your message. You brought her." Isabella's gaze flickered to Sofia, who was now examining her perfectly manicured nails with a deliberate, insulting nonchalance. "Isabella, now is not the time," Alejandro said, his voice low, urgent. He was trying to manage the situation, to control the narrative, just as he did in his boardrooms. But this wasn't a boardroom. This was the precipice of Isabella's world. Not the time. A hysterical laugh bubbled up in her throat, raw and painful. "You bring your mistress Sofia Reyes, the woman whose perfume clings to your clothes to the birth of our child, and you tell me it's not the time." Another contraction seized her, a vice of pure agony. She cried out, arching her back, the physical pain a welcome distraction from the emotional torment. A nurse rushed to her side, offering her a hand to squeeze. Isabella gripped it, her eyes never leaving Alejandro's. Sofia finally spoke, her voice as smooth and cold as polished marble. "He was with me when you called, at a very important dinner. I simply insisted on coming along to offer my support." She smiled, a small, cruel curve of her lips. "We wouldn't want you to be alone at a time like this." The audacity of it was breathtaking. "My support." Isabella repeated, her voice shaking with rage. You have been trying to destroy my marriage for months. You are not welcome here. Get out. I'm afraid that's up to Alejandro, isn't it? Sophia's gaze shifted to him, a silent challenge. Tell her, darling. Alejandro looked trapped, a lion caught in a snare of his own making. Sophia, maybe you should wait outside, he said, his voice lacking any real conviction. No, Sophia said firmly, stepping forward. She was claiming her territory. I'm staying. Isabella needs to face reality. Our relationship isn't some sordid little affair. It's real. And frankly, after all the stress you've put him under with your condition, he needs me here. Isabella felt the blood drain from her face. Her condition, her pregnancy, the most sacred journey of her life reduced to an inconvenience, a burden. How dare you? She whispered the words filled with a venom she didn't know she possessed. This is my child. Our child. She looked pointedly at Alejandro, her eyes begging him to say something to defend her, to defend their family. And we need to be sure of that, don't we? Sophia added quietly, the words dropping into the tense silence, like stones into a still pond. Isabella's head snapped towards her. What did you just say? Alejandro finally seemed to find his voice a harsh, defensive tone. That's enough, Sophia. But the poison had been administered. The seed of doubt, expertly planted by a master manipulator, had found fertile ground in the fractured trust between husband and wife. Isabella stared at Alejandro, searching his face for denial, for outrage at Sophia's insinuation. Instead, she saw a flicker of uncertainty in his dark, honey eyes. That flicker was the final fatal blow. He was actually considering it. He was doubting her fidelity. He was doubting their child. A wave of nausea and despair washed over her, so powerful it eclipsed the physical pain. This was a nightmare from which she couldn't wake. Her husband, the man she loved more than life itself, stood before her, with his mistress on the verge of questioning the legitimacy of the baby she was currently fighting to bring into the world. The white walls of the luxurious suite began to close in the beeping of the monitor, sounding like a death knell for the life she once knew. In that moment, Isabella understood that she was not just in labor with her child. She was in the process of giving birth to a new horrifying reality. The battle of childbirth was primal and all-consuming. In the hours that followed the confrontation, the world outside of Isabella's body ceased to exist. The sharp words, the betrayal, the chilling presence of Sophia Reyes. It all faded into a distant roar, subsumed by the singular monumental task of bringing her son into the world. Alejandro remained a silent, brooding figure in the corner of the room, while Sophia, to Isabella's fury, had been permitted to wait in the private lounge adjoining the suite. Her presence was a toxic energy that seeped under the door. At 3:17 in the morning, after a final heroic push that tore a scream from Isabella's raw throat, her son was born. He was perfect. A mess of dark hair, a tiny, scrunched-up face, and a cry that was startlingly robust. When the nurse laid him on her chest, warm and slick against her skin, a wave of love so fierce, so absolute, washed over Isabella, cleansing her of everything else. This tiny, helpless being was hers. He was the one pure, untainted thing in her shattered world. She looked at his face, tracing the delicate line of his brow, his miniature nose. She saw Alejandro in him. It was unmistakable in the curve of his lips and the shape of his eyes, which were still sealed shut against the harsh, new light of the world. Tears of exhaustion, relief, and a profound, aching love streamed down her face. She named him Matteo. The door opened, and Alejandro approached the bed, his earlier defensiveness replaced by a look of stunned awe. He stared at the small bundle in Isabella's arms, his expression unreadable. For a fleeting moment, Isabella's heart dared to hope. Perhaps, seeing his son, his own flesh and blood, would shatter the spell Sophia had cast over him. He's beautiful, Isabella. Alejandro, whispered his voice thick with emotion. He reached out a hesitant hand, his fingers brushing against Matteo's soft cheek. But the moment was shattered almost as soon as it began. Sophia appeared in the doorway. Her arms crossed her expression, a careful blend of feigned warmth and clinical assessment. "Congratulations," she said, her voice dripping with insincere sweetness. "He is small." She walked closer, her gaze fixed on the baby. "It's remarkable, isn't it? How babies can look like anyone." She let the comment hang in the air before turning her perfectly painted smile on Alejandro. "Darling, now that the hard part is over, perhaps it's time to clear the air, for everyone's peace of mind." Alejandro flinched but didn't contradict her. The poison was still at work. Isabella clutched Matteo closer, a primal protective instinct flaring within her. "There is nothing to clear up," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "Oh, I think there is," Sophia countered smoothly. "A man like Alejandro needs certainty. He's building an empire, a legacy. The question of succession of lineage. It's not a trivial matter. A simple test would resolve everything. It would be a gift, really, to all of us." Isabella looked at Alejandro, her eyes pleading with him. "Don't do this, Alejandro. Don't do this to us. To him." He wouldn't meet her gaze. He looked from Matteo's innocent face to Sophia's calculating one, his own a canvas of torment. The pressure from Sophia, coupled with his own wounded pride and the seeds of doubt she had so expertly sown, was too much. He was a man accustomed to data, to facts, to mitigating risk, and in his compromised state, that's what this had become, a risk to be managed. "It's just a formality, Isabella," he said, finally his voice devoid of emotion. "To silence any questions. We'll use the best lab. My office uses a place for corporate matters, high-level stuff. Gene Corp Diagnostics. They're discreet and foolproof." The name meant nothing to Isabella, but the words foolproof and formality felt like daggers. He had already made the decision. He had chosen doubt over faith, accusation over love. A nurse, looking deeply uncomfortable, entered with the necessary kit. A simple buccal swab from the inside of Matteo's cheek and one from Alejandro. The procedure was quick, sterile, and clinical. As the nurse gently swabbed her newborn son's mouth, Isabella felt a profound and bitter coldness seep into her bones. Her son's welcome into the world was not a celebration of love, but an evidence-gathering exercise. His very identity was being questioned before he had even been alive for an hour, all because his father had brought a viper into their lives. The results, Alejandro informed her, would be expedited. They would have the truth in 24 hours. For Isabella, it felt like a death sentence. The next 24 hours were the longest of Isabella's life. She refused to let Matteo leave her sight, holding him, feeding him, memorizing every detail of his perfect face, as if she were branding the image of him onto her soul. Alejandro had retreated, booking a separate room in the hospital at Sophia's insistence. He sent flowers, a massive, ostentatious bouquet of white lilies that filled the room with a funereal scent. Isabella had the nurses remove them immediately. She existed in a state of suspended animation, a bubble of maternal love, surrounded by a sea of dread. Every time the door opened, her heart leaped into her throat. Nurses came and went checking on her, and the baby their professional smiles doing little to soothe her frayed nerves. They all knew. The hospital staff whispered in the hallways. The story of the millionaire, his laboring wife, and the famous actress was the kind of drama that spread like wildfire. Isabella felt their pity, their judgment, and it was suffocating. Late the next afternoon, Alejandro appeared at her door. Alone this time. He looked haggard, his expensive suit rumpled. In his hand he held a sleek tablet. "The results are in," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any warmth. He didn't approach the bed, but stood near the door, as if creating a safe distance between them. Isabella's breath hitched. She tightened her hold on Mateo, who was sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Alejandro, Gene Corp just sent the encrypted report to my secure server," he said, his fingers tapping on the screen. He brought up a document, a clinical-looking page filled with genetic markers and technical jargon, but at the bottom, highlighted in a stark red box, was the conclusion. He turned the tablet towards her. She didn't need to read the complex data. The 2 words at the bottom were all that mattered. Probability of paternity, 0%. The world tilted on its axis, the beeping of the monitors, the distant city sounds, her own breathing. It all faded into a deafening silence. 0%. The number was an absurdity, a statistical impossibility, a lie so profound it defied comprehension. "No," she whispered. It was the only word she could form. "No, that's not possible. It's a mistake." Alejandro let out a harsh, broken sound that was almost a laugh. A mistake. Isabella Gene Corp Diagnostics has a perfect record. They are the best in the world. The science doesn't lie. He looked at her then, and the conflict that had been warring in his eyes was gone. It had been replaced by a chilling certainty, a look of utter betrayal and revulsion. All this time, he said, his voice thick with a pain so deep it was terrifying. Our entire marriage. Was it all a lie? Who was he, Isabella? Who was the man you were sleeping with behind my back? There was no one, she cried, her voice cracking. Alejandro. You are his father. I have never been with anyone but you. Look at him. He looks just like you. I don't see it. He shot back his face, a cold, hard mask. I see a stranger. I see your betrayal. Suddenly the door swung open, and Sophia swept in, a dark angel arriving for the final act. She went straight to Alejandro's side, placing a comforting hand on his back. I'm so sorry, darling, she murmured, though her eyes when they met, Isabella's, were alight with malicious triumph. I knew something was wrong. I could feel your pain. She was the architect of this destruction, and now she was playing the part of the savior. There's been a mistake, Isabella, repeated her voice, rising with hysteria. The lab, someone made a mistake. Or you did this, she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Sophia. This is your doing. Sophia feigned a wounded look. Isabella, I know you're emotional, but this paranoia is not helping. You've been caught in a lie, and you're lashing out. It's understandable. She turned to Alejandro. She's not well, my love. We need to get you away from this toxicity. Alejandro looked at Isabella, at the woman he had once loved, now hysterical in a hospital bed, clutching a child he believed wasn't his. And he made his choice. "My lawyers will be in contact with you," he said, his voice as cold and final as a tombstone. "They will arrange for a settlement on the condition that you sign a non-disclosure agreement and disappear. You will not use my name. The child is not my responsibility. You are on your own." He turned and walked away, Sophia clinging to his arm, whispering soothingly to him. He didn't look back. The door clicked shut, plunging the room into a deafening silence. Isabella stared at the closed door, her mind struggling to process the cataclysmic event that had just occurred. She had lost everything: her husband, her home, her name, her future. They had taken it all. She looked down at the sleeping baby in her arms, his tiny chest rising and falling in a steady, peaceful rhythm. He was all she had left. A new feeling began to smolder beneath the shock and grief. It was a slow burning ember of rage. They had called her a Lyra. They had called her son a stranger. They had built a lie on top of a betrayal and used it to destroy her. "No," she whispered, not to the empty room, but to her son. "I will not disappear. I will fight. I will prove who you are, Matteo. I swear it." The first deception had been fired. The war had just begun. The eviction was swift and brutal. Less than 48 hours after giving birth, while she was still physically and emotionally shattered, a stern-faced man in a tailored suit, one of Alejandro's lawyers, arrived at the hospital. He presented her with a set of papers and a bank card. "Mr. Morales has made an initial deposit of 50,000 euros into this account." The lawyer stated, his voice devoid of any sympathy. "It is a gesture of goodwill. In exchange, you will vacate the premises of the Madrid estate by the end of the day. A car will be waiting to take you and the child wherever you wish to go within the city limits." He slid another document across the table. A non-disclosure agreement. "Sign this and a more substantial final settlement will be discussed. Refuse and the goodwill deposit is all you will ever receive." Isabella looked at the man at the cold legal document that sought to erase her from Alejandro's life, to buy her silence and her son's illegitimacy. The ember of rage within her glowed brighter. She pushed the papers back across the table. "Tell Alejandro Morales I will not be silenced," she said, her voice shaking but firm. The lawyer simply raised an eyebrow, collected his papers and left. The message was clear. She had chosen the hard way. Thrown out of the hospital with a newborn and a small bag of borrowed baby supplies. The reality of her situation hit her with the force of a physical blow. The gilded cage had vanished, and she was in a free fall. She had no family in Madrid. Her parents lived in a small town in a different country, and had a fragile relationship with Alejandro at best. Her so-called friends were Alejandro's friends, society swans who would flock to power and money, and would undoubtedly believe the salacious narrative Sophia and Alejandro were already spinning. There was only one person she could turn to: Anna. Anna was her childhood friend, a fiery, no-nonsense journalist who had always viewed Isabella's millionaire lifestyle with a healthy dose of skepticism. She lived in a small, cluttered but cozy apartment in the vibrant Malasaña district, a world away from the sterile opulence Isabella had known. When Isabella called, her voice breaking, Anna didn't hesitate. "Give me the address. I'm coming to get you." Seeing Anna's familiar, warm face was the first moment Isabella felt she could truly breathe. Anna took one look at her pale, shell-shocked friend and the tiny infant in her arms, and her expression hardened with protective fury. "That son of a bitch," Anna muttered carefully, taking Matteo from Isabella's arms so she could get in the car. "I never trusted him. Too polished. Too perfect." Anna's apartment was a sanctuary. It smelled of coffee, old books, and life. While Isabella showered, Anna made a makeshift nursery in her spare room. She listened patiently as Isabella recounted the entire horrific ordeal, the months of suspicion, the confrontation in the hospital, Sophia's cruel words, and the devastating DNA test. 0%, Anna said, her journalist's mind immediately kicking into gear. "That's not just a negative result, that's a statistical anomaly. It's almost more likely to get a false positive than a result that's absolute. Unless it's true," Isabella whispered, the fear still a raw wound. "No," Anna said firmly, her eyes blazing with conviction. "Unless it was rigged. You said he used a place called Gene Corp Diagnostics." Isabella nodded. "I've heard of them," Anna said, pulling out her laptop. "They're top tier. They handle sensitive corporate espionage cases, high-stakes patent disputes. Their security is supposed to be legendary, which also means their reputation is everything. A proven mistake would ruin them." For days, Isabella focused solely on Matteo, finding a fragile peace in the simple, demanding rhythm of caring for a newborn. But Anna was a dog with a bone. She spent her nights digging, using her journalistic resources and back channels to probe into Gene Corp. "It's a fortress," Anna reported back a week later, frustrated. "Their digital security is airtight. No disgruntled employees speaking out, no whispers of malpractice. They're clean." Isabella's heart sank. "So it's a dead end?" "Not necessarily," Anna said, her eyes gleaming. "If you can't break down the front door, you look for a side window. You said Alejandro's lawyer mentioned they use Gene Corp for corporate matters, right? High-level stuff." Isabella nodded. "So who in Alejandro's corporate world would have the motive and the means to orchestrate something this complex? This isn't just about a jealous mistress wanting to get rid of a wife. Tampering with a Gene Corp result would be incredibly risky and expensive. Sophia might have the motive, but does she have that kind of power? This feels bigger. This feels like a corporate hit aimed directly at Alejandro's heart." Anna's words hung in the air. The idea was terrifying, but it also made a twisted kind of sense. The attack felt too precise, too devastating to be merely a crime of passion. They had targeted his legacy, his heir. "We need proof, Anna. Without it, it's just a crazy conspiracy theory from a bitter, discarded wife." "Then we get proof," Anna declared, her jaw set. "We can't challenge Gene Corp head-on. But we can investigate the chain of custody. The sample was taken at the hospital. It was picked up by a courier. It was delivered to the lab. Every step is a link in the chain, and every chain has a weak link. We just need to find it." It was a sliver of hope, but for Isabella, it was everything. She was no longer just a victim. She was a fighter. Cast out and left with nothing, she and Anna would start their own investigation, a quiet war waged from a small apartment in Malasaña against a powerful, unseen enemy. They were looking for the truth, one broken link at a time. The first few weeks of the investigation were a series of frustrating dead ends. Anna's official inquiries into the hospital's protocol were met with polite but firm stonewalling, citing patient confidentiality. Alejandro's confidentiality, They refused to release the name of the courier service or the specific technician who handled the samples. It was a wall of institutional silence designed to protect wealthy clients. "They're circling the wagons," Anna said, pacing her small living room, a mess of papers spread across her coffee table. "Alejandro's legal team has probably already been in contact, reminding them of the consequences of a privacy breach." Isabella, rocking a fussy Matteo, felt a familiar wave of despair. "So we're stuck." "No." Anna insisted, her eyes alight with a new idea. "We're thinking like journalists trying to get people to talk. We need to think like a spy. The weak link isn't the official channels, it's the people." Anna's new strategy was to focus on the human element. She spent days camped out in the cafe across from the Clínica Universidad de Navarra, observing the flow of medical couriers. She cross-referenced the logos on their uniforms with local company databases. After 3 days of surveillance and 10 cups of coffee, she got a hit, a mid-level company called Biotrans Express. They weren't the biggest or most prestigious, but they handled overflow work for several major hospitals. The next step was to find the driver. Anna, using a plausible cover story about a lost but sentimentally valuable and non-biological package, managed to get a list of drivers who had been on duty the night Matteo was born. One name stood out: Javier. A part-time driver, a university student trying to make extra cash. He was the definition of a weak link. Finding Javier was easy enough. Getting him to talk was harder. Anna and Isabella, with Matteo sleeping in his carrier, cornered him one afternoon on his university campus. He was jumpy, defensive, and denied everything. "I just deliver the packages," he insisted, refusing to make eye contact. "I don't know what's in them. I pick up. I drop off. That's it." But Anna was relentless. "We know there was a special pickup that night. A priority run from the Clínica to Gene Corp Diagnostics. A VIP client. A pickup that was logged under unusual circumstances." She was bluffing, but it was a calculated risk. Javier's composure cracked. He paled. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" Isabella spoke for the first time, her voice quiet but heavy with the weight of her pain. She adjusted the carrier so Javier could see Matteo's sleeping face. "That package contained the future of this little boy. It was a lie. And we think you know something about it." The sight of the baby, the raw emotion in Isabella's voice, seemed to break through Javier's fear. He glanced around nervously, then motioned for them to follow him to a more secluded bench. "Look, I needed the money," he confessed, his voice dropping to a whisper. "My tuition was due. I got a call that night, not from my dispatcher, but from a private number. It was a man. He told me to intercept the VIP pickup from the Clínica. He said the original sample was contaminated, and that he had the replacement sample. He told me to make sure the replacement was the one that got delivered to Gene Corp." Isabella's heart hammered in her chest. "A replacement sample. Did you see the man?" Javier shook his head. "No. He directed me to a side street near the hospital. The package was left for me in a lockbox. It looked official, same packaging, same seals. But the original sample, I was supposed to destroy it. He paid me 5,000 euros just to switch the packages and keep my mouth shut. It was the smoking gun, a confession, a clear act of sabotage. Did he give you a name?" "Anything?" Anna pressed. "No name," Javier said. But his voice, it was distinctive, low, gravelly, and he mentioned a name. He said Rivas will be pleased the matter is handled. The name hung in the air. Rivas. It meant nothing to Isabella. But when she relayed the information to Anna later that night, Anna's eyes went wide. She turned to her laptop and began typing furiously. Ricardo Rivas. Anna breathed, pulling up a series of articles. He's Alejandro's biggest rival. They've been locked in a brutal corporate war for the last 2 years over a new cellular technology patent. Rivas has a reputation for playing dirty. Very dirty. The pieces of the puzzle began to click into place, forming a picture far more sinister than Isabella could have imagined. This wasn't just about Sofia Reyes. She was likely a pawn, a beautiful, willing distraction. The real mastermind was Ricardo Rivas. He hadn't just wanted to wound Alejandro in the boardroom. He had orchestrated a strike against him that was deeply, horrifically personal. He had aimed to invalidate Alejandro's legacy, to poison the root of his dynasty, by making him deny his own son. But what about Sofia? Isabella asked. She was there. She was the one who pushed for the test. And who do you think put the idea in her head? Anna countered. Rivas is smart. He wouldn't get his own hands dirty. He would find someone close to Alejandro, someone with their own motives, and use them. Sofia wanted you gone. Rivas wanted Alejandro broken. They had a common enemy. Suddenly, Anna stopped. She was staring at a photo from a society gala taken 6 months prior. In the background, almost lost in the crowd, stood Sofia Reyes. She was in an animated conversation with a silver-haired, imposing man. Anna zoomed in. The man was Ricardo Rivas. It was all the proof they needed to take the next step. They had the driver's confession. They had the motive. They had the connection between the conspirators. They now had the ammunition to go back to Alejandro, not as a spurned wife with a wild theory, but with cold, hard facts. They had a glimmer of hope, and it was blindingly bright. Armed with Javier's confession and the damning connection between Sofia and Ricardo Rivas, Isabella knew she couldn't just walk up to Alejandro. He was walled off, cocooned in his anger, and manipulated by the very people who had orchestrated his pain. She needed a battering ram, and that meant finding a lawyer who was fearless enough to take on a titan like Alejandro Morales. Anna, through her network, found the perfect person. A sharp, formidable attorney named Elena Vargas, a woman known for taking on impossible cases and winning. Elena listened to Isabella's story in her sleek, minimalist office, her expression unreadable. She examined Anna's research, Javier's secretly recorded confession, and the photograph of Sofia with Rivas. When Isabella was finished, Elena leaned back in her chair, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face. "This is beautiful," Elena said the words, sending a shiver down Isabella's spine. "It's a symphony of corporate espionage and personal betrayal. They didn't just break the law. They were arrogant about it." Elena's strategy was aggressive. She didn't file a quiet motion. She fired a cannonball. She filed an emergency petition with the family court alleging fraud, conspiracy, and emotional distress. Crucially, she demanded an immediate court-ordered and supervised second DNA test. She attached Javier's affidavit and the evidence linking Sofia to Rivas. She served the papers not just to Alejandro's legal team, but to Alejandro himself. The effect was explosive. Alejandro, who had been trying to bury his pain in work and the empty companionship of Sofia, was blindsided. His lawyers had assured him Isabella would fade away. Instead, she had returned with an army. His first reaction was rage. He called Elena, roaring about defamation and harassment. "Mr. Morales." Elena's voice was like ice over the phone. "Your anger is noted. However, we have a sworn affidavit from the courier who switched the samples on the night your son was born. He did so on the instruction of a man who stated that Rivas will be pleased. We also have evidence placing your current companion, Miss Sofia Reyes, in private conversation with your chief business rival, Ricardo Rivas. If you wish to contest this in open court and have this drama play out on the front page of every newspaper, be my guest. Or you can consent to a simple supervised blood test. The choice is yours." Faced with the undeniable evidence and the threat of a public spectacle that would destroy his company's reputation, Alejandro was cornered. He agreed to the test. The second test was a world away from the first. It took place in a neutral medical facility overseen by a court-appointed supervisor. Elena Vargas was there, a stoic guardian. Alejandro was there, his face pale and grim. Isabella was there, holding Mateo, her heart, a tangled mess of hope and fear. Sofia was notably absent, having been ordered by Alejandro's frantic lawyers to make herself scarce. The blood draw was quick. The wait for the results was agonizing. They all gathered 2 days later in Elena Vargas's conference room. The air was thick enough to cut with a knife. A court official arrived with a sealed envelope. He opened it and read the single-page report aloud. His voice was flat and official. Based on the analysis of the DNA samples provided, the alleged father, Alejandro Morales, is not excluded as the biological father of the child, Mateo Morales. The probability of paternity is 99.9999%. Silence. The words echoed in the sterile room. 19.9999%. Isabella let out a shuddering sob, burying her face in Mateo's soft blanket. Vindicated. Her son was vindicated. Alejandro stared at the report as if it were written in a foreign language. The color drained from his face, replaced by a ghastly, mottled gray. The entire foundation of his rage, his cruelty, his life for the past month had been a lie. A lie he had not only believed, but had championed. He looked at Isabella, truly looked at her for the first time since that horrific night in the hospital. He saw the profound pain in her eyes, the exhaustion, the resilience. And he saw the love she held for the son he had disowned. The weight of his actions crashed down on him with the force of a physical blow. He staggered back a step, his hand going to his chest as if he couldn't breathe. "Isabella." He choked out his voice, a raw, broken thing. "My God, what have I done?" The unmasking was complete. But the truth was a double-edged sword. It had cleared Isabella's name, but it had also unleashed a new kind of chaos. The betrayal was not hers, but his, and the man who had been the architect of it all, Ricardo Rivas, was still out there, while the woman who had acted as his willing accomplice, Sofia Reyes, was about to face a reckoning of her own. Alejandro had his son back, but he had lost his wife, and the journey to even begin to atone for that was a mountain far higher than any he had ever climbed in the world of business. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. Armed with the court-verified DNA results and Javier's testimony, Elena Vargas didn't just win. She went on the offensive. She strategically leaked key parts of the story to Ana, who crafted a stunning, explosive piece of investigative journalism that laid the entire conspiracy bare. The story of the corporate titan, the spurned wife, the scheming actress, and the rival who weaponized a baby's paternity became an international sensation. Ricardo Rivas's reputation was shattered. His company's stock plummeted as investors fled from the taint of his dishonorable tactics. He was engulfed in a firestorm of lawsuits and investigations. Sofia Reyes's career evaporated overnight. The endorsement deals vanished. The film roles were rescinded. Branded as a malicious homewrecker and a co-conspirator in a cruel plot against a mother and her newborn, she became a pariah. The public that had once adored her now reviled her. She disappeared from the limelight, her ambition turning to ash in her mouth. But for Isabella, the public victory was a hollow echo compared to the private war still raging in her heart. Alejandro was a man undone. The revelation had not just exposed his gullibility. It had forced him to look at a part of himself he never knew existed. A cruel, vengeful, and weak man, easily manipulated by pride and a beautiful face. He was consumed by a guilt so profound it was a physical illness. He fired his entire legal team. He came to Anna's apartment, not as a millionaire, but as a penitent. He stood at the door, drenched from the rain, his eyes red-rimmed and pleading. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Isabella," he said, his voice raw. "There are no words to excuse what I did. I was a fool, a monster. I let them poison my mind against you, the purest thing in my life. I betrayed you. I betrayed our son." He had transferred the Madrid mansion into her name. He had set up a trust fund for Mateo so vast that it would ensure his future 100 times over. He offered to finance Anna's dream of starting her own independent news agency. He offered Isabella anything she wanted the world if she would just take it. But Isabella was no longer the woman who had lived in the gilded cage. The fire of the past month had burned away her naivete, reforging her into someone stronger, someone who understood that her worth was not tied to a man, a mansion, or a name. She let him see Mateo. She watched as he held his son for the first time with the full, undisputed knowledge that this was his flesh and blood. She saw the tears stream down his face, the profound, gut-wrenching regret in his eyes. A part of her, the part that still loved the man he once was, ached for him. But love was no longer enough. Trust once shattered so completely could not simply be glued back together. Weeks turned into months. Alejandro was relentless in his pursuit of redemption. He attended therapy. He made public apologies. He dedicated his time and resources to charities for single mothers. He sent her letters not of excuse, but of self-reflection, taking full accountability for his every failure. He didn't ask her to come back. He simply asked for the chance to prove he could be the father Mateo deserved, and perhaps one day, a man she could respect again. The story ends not with a kiss, but with a choice. We see Isabella months later, sitting in the sun-drenched garden of the Madrid mansion. Her mansion. She is radiant, confident, a queen on her own throne. Mateo is laughing in his playpen on the grass. Her phone buzzes. It's a message from Alejandro. He is in the city and would like to see Mateo. He makes no demands on her time, simply offering to be a father. Isabella looks at her son, at the beautiful life she has secured for them both. She has been vindicated. She has found her power. The story is no longer about his betrayal, but about her resilience. Whether she will ever let Alejandro back into her heart remains an unanswered question. But for the first time, the choice is entirely hers. She is not a victim of a millionaire's drama, but the architect of her own new life, built from the ashes stronger and more beautiful than before. The journey of Isabella is a testament to the incredible strength of a mother's love and the resilience of the human spirit. From the depths of unimaginable betrayal to the triumphant reclaiming of her truth, her story reminds us that even when our worlds are set on fire, we can rise from the ashes. But what do you think? Was Alejandro's remorse genuine? Can a trust so completely shattered ever be rebuilt? Or are some betrayals truly unforgivable? We want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of drama resilience and ultimate justice moved you, please give this video a like and share it with others who love a story where the truth prevails. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next compelling narrative. Thank you for listening.